Hello everybody, and this is yet another 2014 album review, and oh man, this is a big one. For a lot of typical heavy metal guys, this is a big album to talk about because it's from probably one of the most important metal bands from the 90s and the 2000s that are still making music today. So as you tell in the title below, this is the review of Opeth's Pale Communion. Now, it's been 3 years since Opeth's put an album out, and that was Heritage back in 2011, where they went through a radical transformation in their sound. Because Opeth is a band, for those who don't know who Opeth is a band from Sweden that was a progressive death metal slash progressive black metal band in the early stages of their career in the mid 90s when they put out their first three albums: Orchid, Morning Rise, and My Arms, My Hearse. I believe it's what the album's called. But yeah, all three of those albums had a sound that mixed together extreme metal stylings of black metal and death metal with the structuring of progressive music, progressive metal, progressive rock, whatever you want to call it. But then starting on their album Still Life, Michael Ackerfeet, the vocalist and guitarist, made his voice deeper to the point where there's no black metal elements in his voice anymore. It's all purely death metal. And songs on that album like The Moor and such songs like that that have the heaviness but with the beauty behind it. And then the song Face of Melinda, where Michael Ackerfeet's able to showcase his clean singing style. That transformation continued on to their next album, which was their best record they ever put out, Blackwater Park. It's a classic album from the 2000s, a classic in progressive music. And then it followed up with Deliverance, which continued the sound of Blackwater Park. But then their first real notable change in their career as far as an overall sound was their album Damnation, which was standard progressive rock with all clean singing. Then they went back to the extremity styles on Ghost Riverities, and then they continued that into Watershed, which was the last prog death metal album they ever put out. And then they released Heritage, which came out 2 years ago, in which they really mixed together like old school prog rock, prog metal, and jazz fusion elements together into one album. Although it harkens more of the old school progressive rock than it does metal, and oddly enough, that transition continues with this album, Pale Communion. Although, if I was to say the main difference between this album and Heritage, this album has a little tiny bit of a heavier tone to it. It's more of like an old school hard rock kind of heaviness to it rather than like a heavy metal heaviness to it. It's more of like a old school 70s hard rock heaviness of, say, like something like Rush. Let's go with that. But the most of the sound, you have some jazz elements, like when it comes to the melody of it, but with the structuring and the musicianship of progressive rock. But let's talk about some of these tracks. The opening track, Eternal Rains Will Come, was a phenomenal song. I just really, really loved how that song was put together with the acoustic guitars. And Michael Ackerfeet's able to bring to the table his great, soft, clean singing voice. While he's a phenomenal death metal vocalist, don't get me wrong, but when he does his more mellow singing, it's beautiful. Like, Michael Ackerfeet, I think, is probably one of the more diverse and talented vocalists in the history of heavy metal, because he can do the black metal, he can do the death metal, but he can also sing high and sing clean and do very well with it. And Eternal Rains Will Come was a prime example of that. Cusp of Eternity, which was the single they put out, the first single they put out for the album. I thought it was a solid track, but it just wasn't one of those songs that hit me like pretty much most of the songs on this album. Still a good song to kind of get things going for people to understand what this album was going to sound like. Then we got to an epic, the Moon Above, Sun Below track. Even though people think it should be the other way around, sun below, moon above, but whatever. The longest song on the album at nearly 11 minutes long. Beautiful, beautifully landscaped, well put together. Just absolutely, really, really enjoyed that track. And then we had Elasian Woes, which was the second shortest song on the album at a little over 4.5 minutes. For a short song on the album like that, I thought it was a phenomenal track. Excuse me. And then they had the instrumental Goblin, which was the shortest song on the album at 4 minutes 32 seconds. I personally thought that this was the second weakest track on the album with Cusp of Eternity, but this was still a really solid instrumental. Like, even though it just wasn't one of those instrumentals that like hit me hard, say like other rock or metal instrumental tracks, say like La Villa Strangiato by Rush or Orion by Metallica, or Absolution by Megadeth, or Musical Death, a Diverge, or a Dirge by Testament. It just doesn't really have that kind of like grandiose kind of atmosphere like those songs did for me personally. But this was still a solid instrumental, don't get me wrong. But then we get to the big three, my three favorite tracks on this album, because it almost connected within each other. River, Voice of Treason, and Faith in Others. All three of those tracks were amazing tracks. Like, I just really, really loved how beautiful it was presented, and the musicianship behind it. I mean, with Frederick Hawkinson on second guitar. And my phone is ringing, and I am not answering it right now. Sorry about that, but River, Voice of Treason, and Faith in Others are three beautifully crafted songs in progressive music that I've heard. This is probably some of the best prog music I've heard since Mastodon's The Hunter. Even though Mastodon's Once More Around the Sun was a really good album, it just didn't hit hard with me just like it did with The Hunter. But with River, Voice of Treason, Faith in Others, he had a great acoustic guitar melody going on in the tracks, along with some good electric guitar and the phenomenal vocal style of Michael Ackerfeed. And it was just three of the most beautifully crafted, well put together prog songs I've heard in a while. Probably, like I said, probably since The Hunter by Mastodon. But then again, there have been others out there that have been in that same kind of realm as far as beauty and texture and stuff like that within its songs. So overall with this album, you had some phenomenal musicianship going on this record. And Opeth's really trying to help bring back, at least within the mainstream rock or even metal realms, of bringing back old school progressive music into today's era of music. And I think the music industry nowadays needs some of that, because prog rock or prog metal always does very, very well in the music industry because it gets infused in so many places. And with metal, it's well present with prog music. Like, you can combine prog music with death metal, black metal, thrash metal, sludge metal, doom metal. so many other type of metal styles. You can combine prog rock or prog metal into a different style of music and make it work. Like combining prog rock and psychedelic rock to make space rock, stuff like that. So to me, that has always been a key thing to me when it comes to prog music, is that it always does well because it gets infused in many places. And with this album, they infused some of the heavy, or not the heavy, but the 70s hard rock style with some jazz elements, with the old school prog rock, put it all together into this album. The guitars were absolutely great. The electric work was solid, but it was the acoustic guitars that really, really got me going, because I just loved how they were able to play that. The electric guitars were great as well, but the acoustics really, really set the tone for this record. Michael Ackerfeet's clean singing was immense. There was also a certain amount of darkness to this album that I really, really liked. On like songs like Moon Above, Sun Below, or Eternal Rains Will Come, or River, Voice of Treason, all those songs that had a certain amount of darkness to it, and real atmospheric, dramatic passages in the album, and most importantly of all, the experimentation done on this album was immense. Overall, this is an album that I would actually recommend people buying. Buy this album. This is definitely an album to purchase, and if I get any money, I'm probably going to buy this album, because this was a solid, phenomenal CD. Loved how the band was able to craft just challenging stuff with some melody, and just beautifully crafted songs. At this moment, this is probably at the moment the album of the year for the time being. I mean, we still got plenty more albums left that are coming out that are gonna be highly acclaimed, like Cannibal Corpse, Obituary, The Agonist, Slipknot's coming out with an album. Can you imagine that? Finally, Slipknot's getting an album out, and so many others, and also others I haven't talked about, like Iced Earth, or Prong, or stuff like that. So, but at the moment, Opeth Pale Communion is the album of the year. I give this album a solid 9 and 9.75 out of 10. Or actually, no, make that 9.5, because while Cusp of Eternity and Goblin were really good songs, they just weren't like songs that hit me hard like every other song on the album. But this album, because how beautifully crafted it was, this, at the moment, is the album of the year for me in 2014. But we still got plenty more to come. And the next album I do plan on reviewing will be the new Accept album, Blind Rage, if I can find a sample of it. But anyways, guys, thank you for watching this review. Peace and rock on!